Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Tuesday, February 2nd. I don't know, has anyone heard today? Today is Groundhog Day. Have you ever heard of this? You're looking at me like you've never heard of this. It's a North American thing. It's quite weird. I don't know where it comes from, but the sort of custom is, do you know what a groundhog is? It's like a rodent. It's like a big rodent that like lives underground. It's not a rat, but it's like that kind of thing. It's an animal, yeah. It's an animal. It's a larger rodent, and I wonder if I have a picture of it actually. Hang on. If we're gonna talk about this, groundhog. Right, images. Here we go. So here. It's I'll show you in just 1 second here what it is. Yeah, it's one of these things. It's one of these things, yeah. So that's a groundhog. And so there is this custom, and I don't know where the custom comes from, but if the groundhog comes out of his hole in the ground on February 2nd, and I think it's if he sees his shadow, there will be 6 more weeks of winter. And if he doesn't see his shadow, then spring has arrived. You're kind of looking at me like...
Is there a specific groundhog?
There are specific groundhogs. There are specific... So there's... who's this groundhog here? It doesn't say. I don't know there used to be 2. There used to be Punxsutawney Phil, who was in like Wisconsin or something, and then there was who was the other one? Wyerton Willie, and he lived in. Both of them were American groundhogs, and so those. I don't know how they got to be the official groundhogs. I don't know how the groundhog knows what the weather is going to be like. The meteorologists who predict the weather don't know what the weather is going to be like. I don't know how the rodent knows. I don't know why this is a big deal. I don't know why anyone talks about it at all. But yeah, this is a thing North American people do, and it's quite bizarre, is it not? Yeah, especially where I came from. Where I came from Edmonton, which is a little bit to the east of here, but further north in Alberta, and so. We would always laugh because the newspapers would report, it's going to be 6 more weeks of winter, but like in Edmonton, you're getting 6 more weeks of winter all the time. you're never getting spring in February. You're getting spring in May, so it doesn't matter what the groundhog sees. I don't know. It's a thing. So today is Groundhog Day. I think spring has arrived. So says the groundhog, but I don't know for sure. Who knows? North America is a weird place. I never got the whole groundhog thing. Okay, so Ryan is here. Good morning, Ryan. Nicole is here. Good morning, Nicole. Simrat is here. Good morning, Simrat. Sarah's here. There she is. Good morning, Sarah. Abby is here. Good morning. Tufshin Sana is here. Good morning to you. And Shania is here. Good morning, Shania. Okay, so let me just make sure I'm not on the right slide here. Hang on. That's the one. Nope, that's not the one I want. Hang on. Okay, that is the one I want. All right, so, yesterday we talked a little bit about the paper I've assigned to you. You probably saw it pop up in Microsoft Teams. In that assignment in Microsoft Teams, you'll see a little sheet where I ask you what to do, and then I've also got a marking guide in there as well. And so something I didn't point out or I didn't mention yesterday is when you submit the assignment, I would like you to submit it through Teams as well. So you'll go back into the assignment just like you hopefully did, and you'll just go, there's a little add resources thing, and you just hit add resources, and you can attach your document, whether it's in Word or PDF or whatever it is. You can attach it, and then it'll be submitted, and then again, everything will be in one spot. Last term, I had all kinds of confusion because people were Teams messaging it to me and emailing it to me and then sharing it with me on Google Drives, but then I didn't have permission to see their draft, and it was a whole thing. So we'll use Teams, submit it through there, and then everyone's stuff will be in one place, and then I can easily find it and mark it, and I don't have to forget things or chase things around.
When's the due?
I think not this Friday, but next Friday. Next Friday. And so okay, so yesterday when we were talking about that, maybe what we'll do is we'll start with that. We read that paper by David Butt, right? David Butt. And he had an argument to make to us about using artificial intelligence, using AI in criminal justice. And Mulder, you kind of phrased the conclusion really well. Do you remember what you said? Right. So we should use AI in the criminal justice system only if it's publicly funded. And we said that, why did we say that? We had a few premises because, right? So there's a cost savings, which is good, right? It will save money. Right, so allowing us to control the software will allow us to do what? The independence is important, but it's kind of important why. Yeah, well, we will know how it works, right? And so someone's defense lawyer, I think David Butt mentions Eric Loomis, who was kind of the getaway driver in a drive-by shooting. At least his lawyer can, try to defend his client. But with AI that we get from a private company and we don't know how it works, you can't really challenge it in court, right? Because you don't know how it has come to its decision. Anything else? Any other premises? It's inexpensive. It will allow us to challenge it in a way that private software, we can't do that. And what else? Good morning. I don't think that was a premise of his, but it is true. And it's, what's that? I said that, yeah, it is true. And so in many cases, court systems are backed up, months and months and months if people would only stop committing crimes, but they just keep doing it. Yeah. So, but yeah, they're backed up months and months. And part of, what we attempt to guarantee here in North America is, you need to be tried within a reasonable time, right? You have a right to a fair trial within a reasonable time. So the police can't arrest you and say, oh, okay, you'll go to trial in 7 or 8 years, right? That's not fair. You have to be arrested, you have to be charged, and you have to have a trial in a reasonable amount of time. And so, yeah, having a system like this will maybe speed things up. What else? So we can?
Fair choice. We don't have to pick between psychiatrists and private providers.
Oh, right. Yeah, so he's saying that, one thing is that this is not an either-or choice, right? We don't have to choose justice over capitalism or private enterprise, right? We can have a compromise here, right? There's a third option. We can do this ourselves, right? Now, the part we didn't get to yesterday is the responding to David's argument. So if we kind of use the same method that we did with my coffee argument, okay, let's start with the premises. Are they all true? So is AI cheaper?
Yes.
Yeah, getting a computer program to do something that a human can do is always more inexpensive, right? Maybe more expensive at the beginning, but as you do it over and over again, it becomes cheaper. If we publicly develop this software, would we know how it works?
Yes.
Absolutely we would, right? Is there actually a third option that we don't have to make a choice of one or the other? Yeah, well, yeah, because that's logical, right? We could, this is something we could do, right? David is suggesting this is something we could do. We don't have to choose, you know, we don't have to choose justice over commercial enterprise or one or the other, right? We can do both. I think they're all true. Are they logical support for his conclusion? Are they all reasons why we might want to publicly develop our own AI? Yeah, cheaper, you know, upholds the principles of justice and gives us a third option. Those are all reasonable or those are all reasons why we might choose to do this thing. So David's got a good argument. What do you think of it, though? Do you agree with him? Are there things that maybe he should have talked about that he did not? And I know this is a tricky one, right? Because when we talked about coffee, we all understand beverages, right? But we probably don't all understand criminal justice. Nobody's a lawyer or a judge in this room. Paralegal. I'll even take a paralegal. No. So, yeah, most of us don't have a very good understanding of the criminal justice system, so it's difficult for us to comment. But what do you think?
Like if you use an AI, you won't be able to appeal to its sympathy or what's that? Empathy.
Yeah. So that's a good point, right? Using this AI software is not empathetic, right? Software doesn't feel bad about the situation that people are in. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? I feel like you're saying it as a bad thing, right?
Like if they had a really bad day and they did a really bad thing, it doesn't mean they're going to do it again in the future.
Sure, right? Could have been just a one-off situation, right? It's true, right? So I guess to some degree we don't really know. Well, I guess the problem again is that we don't really know how the software is working, right? If Daniel commits a crime? Sorry, Daniel. Daniel commits a crime, and he's sitting in front of me, and I'm the judge, and I have to sentence him. What kind of factors do I need to know to figure out if he's going to commit another crime? How would I think about that? How would I try to decide, did he have a bad day? Was it just one-off and he'll be fine? Or, you know, am I going to let him out and he's going to go and steal a car and rob a bank, right? How am I going to know? What kind of factors would I take into account?
Family background, how much money he has, does he have a job?
Okay. All right, so I might, his personal life, right? Does he have support? Does he have a family? Does he have a job, or will he have a job once this trial is done? What else?
Can talk to me, Judge, clearly.
Sure, you might have been called to testify, right? So you might have to explain what happened to the court, and I might be paying close attention to what you say and how you act, right? To try and get a sense of if you're really sorry or not. What else? What else might I take into account? How do I know? Should I give him 10 years or 3 months? What to do? Or life? What did you do, Daniel?
I'm not saying that if the judge did this, he should do it, but I think a lot of people would judge someone based on their skin color.
Ooh, very interesting. So,
Use an AI, that won't be a problem.
right. So that's actually that's a point for AI, right? Is the idea that, you know, I might have prejudices, right? I may have kind of subconscious prejudices that I'm not aware of against Daniel's race or ethnicity or religion or who knows what, right? And that might get in the way of my making a fair decision. But in theory, the AI doesn't know that, right? And so if we don't tell it to discriminate based on race, hopefully it will not do that, right? But you're right, it would be possible. Actually, there's studies out, and I haven't read them recently, but there's studies out saying that judges actually give out harsher sentences before lunch because they're hungry. And so people who go before the judge before lunch tend to get harsher sentences. People who tend to go before the judge after lunch get more lenient sentences because they've eaten and they're happier. Daniel, have you committed any other crimes? Are you sure? Because that would be good too, right? What's Daniel's criminal history, right? Is this a first offense, or is this, the 8th time he's stolen a car, right? Because if it's the 8th time you've stolen a car, you're not, yeah, you have not learned your lesson yet, right? So yeah, that might fall into it as well, right? What else? What else might I consider before sentencing Daniel?
Like it was more criminal, or it was like more family related, like in which era he was more active?
Okay, in which area he was more active?
Yeah, like which area he put in more effort to like get in the jail.
Okay, I guess kind of like how far into the criminal underworld has he descended, right? Yeah. Is he a family man who just, couldn't pay the rent for his 4 little kids, and so he stole some money to make sure they had a home? Or is he like a hardcore Pablo Escobar level drug dealer, right? Yeah, it's a different story. Those are different things, right? What else? We don't really know what you did. So maybe danger to the public is part of it too, right? So if you cheated on your taxes, are you a danger to the public? No, right? But if you tried to murder someone, maybe more so, right? So how dangerous you are to the public might have something to do with it as well. But anyway, so the software might take all these things into account, right? And then it will give me a percentage, right? So let's say I run it through the AI, and it comes back, Daniel has a 52% chance of reoffending, okay? So I can still use my empathy though, right? So I don't have to listen to the AI because I'm still the judge, right? So I can look at the AI and say, hey guys, I don't want to compete with you back there, okay? So yes, I can still use my empathy, I think is my point, right? The AI can give me a number and I'm like, yeah, but you know what? From what I've seen in this trial, I think Daniel's a good guy. He's got a lot of things going for him in his life. Maybe he just needs a little bit of a break here, right? So I can also disagree with what the software tells me, but at least it's something, right? It's something to think about. But still, it's a good point, right? Software is unempathetic. Software doesn't take into account whether you had a bad or good day. But like Mulder mentioned, it also has positives in that way. If we don't teach it to discriminate one way, it will not, right? Whereas humans, you never really know, right? Humans have prejudices and sort of stereotypes in our head. Sometimes we're hungry because we haven't eaten lunch. So AI doesn't do that, right? We don't have to worry about those human failings. What else? Any other kind of comments here? How else could we think about this argument? Is there anything that was missed? Do you agree with what David said?
Like as we go more further, like we get to that conclusion, like the human can't like judge another people like fully, like at their best, how I should say, get them what they actually deserve.
It is pretty much, good morning, it is pretty much impossible for humans to be objective about anything, right? We are very imperfect creatures in that way. We're always seeing things through the lens of our socialization, through our upbringing, through prejudices and stereotypes that we've learned through our experience, based on our, our mood or our level of mental health. We may see things one thing or one way one day and another way another day. Yeah, we're very unobjective, fallible beings, right? So, yeah, maybe a little bit of help from AI is desirable, right? I don't know that I would want to be sentenced by a computer program only, right? I don't know if I would want to go before robo-judge and he just, hands out the sentence. I think that would be terrifying. But it's true, right? We're very fallible beings. We make a lot of cognitive mistakes, and so judges are supposed to be trained not to do that, but they're human beings too, right? What else do you think?
If it's publicly funded and everyone knows how it works, it can be manipulated by, like, a hacker, for example.
I guess that's possible, right? Software can be hacked, software can be, manipulated in a way that a forensic psychologist cannot, right? Unless you pay them off, unless you bribe them and they're crooked or whatever. But that's true, right? So software is vulnerable in that way. There are security issues to be concerned about.
Also, it depends on lawyer.
Well, that's always the case, right? It always depends on if you have a good lawyer or not, right? That's across the board. You have to worry about that. One thing that people might say is that things that are developed by the public sector are often not very good. Government bureaucracies are often not very good at running or developing things that the commercial world is. So, a software company will be able to create software like this that is far better and for far less cost than the government will. So if we choose to do this, it is going to be more expensive than just buying it from a private company, and it is probably not going to work very well. And you've probably seen this if you've ever used a government website. Government websites are inferior to basically every other website that you might encounter, right? They're just can't seem to pull it off, right? Is that your experience? Yeah, their websites are a pain in the butt. They're always going down. They're difficult to navigate and type things into, and yeah, they're a huge hassle, right? Whereas other websites, the private companies, it just works like that, right? So there is that possibility too, is that we run the risk of spending a lot of money and maybe getting an inferior product as well, right? Our software might not be as good as private businesses. Okay, so we could talk about this a little longer, but I don't think we have to. But what I want to point out to you in talking about this is the kind of thing that I want you to do with your paper, right? I want you to find it. Now, this one isn't perfectly on topic, right? The criminal justice one. It's just a good example of a good argument. So again, we pulled the argument out of that paper, right? We found David Butt's argument. We restated it in our own words, in our own terms, right? We said what the argument was, and then we responded to it. We said, yeah, okay, this is good, but there's some other things we should think about. We didn't necessarily say whether we agreed with it or disagree with it, but we could. I think he's got a good point. So if it was me, I would say, I agree with David's argument, right? I think that, my concern that we will get an inferior product still stands, but I think it's worth attempting to save money on this and save time on this. And I think that, the sort of fairness and justice, the fairness principle in criminal justice has to be upheld, right? We can't have people being sent to jail on what an algorithm says, and we don't even know what the algorithm does, right? That's not fair, right? That's not justice. So we have to fix that, I would say, and I think this is probably a good way forward. But but it is going to cost us more money, and we're probably going to get something that's not as good as what we could have bought from a private company. But maybe that's just the price we have to pay for justice, or something. I might say something like that. So that's kind of what I want you to do, is explain the argument and then talk about it. Is this a good argument? Do the premises support the conclusion? Are the premises true? Is there anything missing? And then come to some sort of decision, right? Yes, I agree with this argument because of this and this, or I really don't agree with this because of this thing, or, you know, if this person had have said something like this, then I might agree with them, but actually I don't. And yeah, so give me your thoughts in that regard, okay? Okay, let's leave David Butt. Sorry, David, I'm having a lot of fun with your name. It's not funny. Right, let's go back to where we were before, which was oppression and power. So recall, if you will, that oppression was a set of policies and practices and traditions and norms and definitions and discourses, all of these things in a society working together to advantage the dominant group and to disadvantage the minoritized group. Just a little hint about minoritized. That doesn't necessarily mean the minoritized group is in the minority. Doesn't necessarily mean there are less of them. Often that's the case, but not always, right? If you look in North America here, women are the minoritized group. But if you look at the numbers, you'll see that women are actually in the majority. Not by very much. I think it's about 52%. But still, there are more women in North America than men. And yet, they are in the minoritized group, because it's not about numbers. It's about who holds institutional power. Okay? We talked a little bit about stereotypes and prejudice and discrimination, and I gave you the dog example about stereotypical ideas about dogs, whether we had a positive or negative prejudice towards dogs, and then how we might positively discriminate towards the dog or negatively discriminate towards the dog, right? Last time we talked, which was on Friday, we were talking about people expressing prejudice publicly because they often believe these things to be factual. And so we're talking here about Tess Holliday and her cover on Cosmo magazine and a couple years ago, and the idea that a lot of people, not just Piers Morgan, but a lot of people criticized her appearance on the cover of this magazine. And their critique, I think, probably had more to do with their prejudice against people who are overweight rather than any sort of concern about Tess's health or about public health in general, right? And so again, here we have stereotypical ideas about what people who are overweight are like, and I think we mentioned that we had stereotypes that people who are overweight were lazy or stupid, or they had no self-control, or they didn't care about their health, or they were slobs, or all kind of negative stereotypes associated with people who are overweight. But again, there's this little grain of truth in that, yeah, if you carry extra body fat, sometimes it can be associated with other health risks, right? So there is a health risk to carrying excess weight, right? And again, I'm not a doctor, and I'm certainly not Tess's doctor, so I'm not prepared to comment on her level of health here. But there is a kind of a grain of truth, and so Piers Morgan here is going to hide behind that, but he's going to express his prejudices, right? So he's going to say that he's concerned about public health or Tess's health, but really what's motivating that statement is his own prejudices about people who are overweight. And again, I'm not positive about that either, because I don't know Piers Morgan and I don't know what his intent was, but I think that's kind of what we're seeing. And again, a lot of people criticize Tess for this cover as well. Yeah, and so this is kind of a prejudice that's very freely expressed in society, a prejudice against people who are overweight. And again, it is rationalized as concern over health, right? And so, but keep in mind, think about how, think about who these prejudicial ideas benefit, right? So we have a beauty and an entertainment industry here in the West that is massive, right? And that beauty and entertainment and fitness industry too is predicated, so it's based on the idea of selling you an idea of beauty, right? And that idea of beauty is young and slim and toned and makeup and the hair and the whole thing, right? We all know what hot is, right? We all know what that is. And these industries are very invested in selling that to you, right? And so just look at the beauty industry. This is a $500 billion industry here in the West. Massive, right? And if you've ever gone into a Sephora, you know where all that money is coming from, because holy cow, is that stuff expensive. But that's a huge industry that is invested in you believing, you know, that this is what beauty is, right? And if you want to be beautiful, these are the products you need, right? You need mascara and eyeliner and foundation and, you know, lipstick and all of these things to make you beautiful. You need these things to put in your hair to make your hair beautiful, right? You need all of these diet supplements to make sure that your body fits into the dimensions that people find acceptable, right? You need all of these clothes from all of these very expensive designers to show the world that you are beautiful, right? There's a massive amount of money tied up in trying to show you that this is what beauty is and this is what you need to be, right? And so, really it's, you know, this prejudice against people who are overweight is very prevalent. And again, it's rationalized away with fact. But really there are a lot of companies that have a pretty big stake in pushing you to be beautiful and feeding the prejudice that, you know, if you carry 10 or 15 extra pounds, then, you know, ugh, right? And so they're very invested in making you feel that way, particularly women, because of course most of the fashion and the beauty industry is targeted at women, and of course women are the people who spend the money on that sort of things, right? Fashion, makeup, skin treatments, beauty products, all of that stuff, right? That money comes out of the pockets of women for the most part. And so, yeah, so there's economic forces tied to circulating this prejudice, and it's a dangerous one, right? Because it's certainly hurtful to people like Tess, right, who's comfortable with her body, and, you know, Cosmo decided to put her on the cover, and yet she's going to be made to feel bad about that. But these kind of prejudices that are circulated in the service of the beauty industry and the entertainment industry are not only damaging to women like Tess, but also to younger girls as well. And so there's lots of kind of reports and evidence of very young girls being very conscious about their weight and their appearance at a time in their life where they don't need to be, right? 9-year-old girls do not need to worry about their weight, right? 9-year-old girls are still growing. They don't need diets. They need to eat healthy food and make sure they're healthy, but they don't need to be stepping on a scale every day, right? That's not healthy for them physically, and it's not healthy for them mentally. But again, this kind of beauty and entertainment industry pushes an idea of what women, to some degree men as well, but mostly women, pushes an idea of what they need to look like, and it's pushed in order to make money. But again, the idea and the prejudice is very damaging to a lot of people, right? Right. Discrimination. So we talked about discrimination. It's when you act on your prejudice. You can do it in a positive or negative way. Let me give you a little bit of an example of discrimination, okay? So there have been a lot of studies that have taken place about discrimination in hiring, okay? So again, discrimination is easy to see if somebody overtly does it, right? So with the dog example, if my friend calls me up and says, "Hey, can I come over on the weekend?" and I say yes, but don't bring that shaggy animal into my house, right? It's a very clear negative discrimination against the dog. But sometimes discrimination is harder to see because for the most part, people aren't that clear, right? People often don't clearly state that they're discriminating. And so you have to do some experiments. You have to do some studies to try and find out if discrimination is actually happening. So I'll direct your attention to this, which I will not make you read. You're welcome. An article that appeared actually a number of years ago, and it says, are Emily and Greg more employable than Lakeisha and Jamal? A field experiment on labor market discrimination. So this is a little experiment conducted by Marianne Bertrand and Senthil Uboy Mulanathan. And these are two researchers from University of Chicago. And here's what their experiment was. Here's what they did. So they looked through the newspapers in Chicago and in Boston. They found a bunch of help wanted ads, a bunch of employment ads, and they replied to them with phony resumes. Okay? So fake resumes. They made up the credentials, they made up the experience, but they made them so that they were basically the same. Okay? So they created two different versions of the same resume so that people had very similar qualifications, very similar experience. And then they put a name at the top. Okay? And so on some resumes got names that were very stereotypically white. Okay? So Greg Baker or Emily Walsh, those are super white sounding names for the United States. Okay? The other half got stereotypically black sounding names for the United States. So Jamal Jones or Lakeisha Washington are very stereotypically black names of black Americans, right? Sent out the resumes and waited to see who would get a call back for an interview. And so what do you think happened?
I think both parties received their call.
That is true. So they did receive calls from the black sounding names and the white sounding names, or for them, not from them, but for them.
So yes, both parties.
Equally, do you think?
Unless they pay a lot of attention to the color of their skin, then I think it's pretty much equal.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Is that you can't know for sure because again, these people don't exist, right? Greg Baker does not exist, so it's just a name on a page, right? The same thing with Lakeisha Washington. She doesn't exist either. It's just a name on a page. But who do you think got the callbacks more often? Yeah, it's very true. The white names got more callbacks, right? And so and they did this experiment with a few different variations. And so they did one with the credentials and experience being about the same, and white names got called back more often. They did another version of the experiment where actually the stereotypically black names had better qualifications and more experience, and white names still got more callbacks. And they sent these resumes out to all different kinds of industries, okay? So there was kind of some low-level jobs like dishwashers and food delivery drivers and things, and then there was some office jobs and office managers, and so they tried this in all kinds of different industries, and the pattern held. White names still got more callbacks than black names. Do you know who Kal Penn is? The actor? Kal Penn? If you've ever seen, probably the most popular thing he's been in is these kind of funny movies about these two pot-smoking guys, Harold and Kumar. And Harold and Kumar, they go to White Castle and they have a few adventures, and they're funny, kind of raunchy comedy movies. And Kal Penn is he's of Indian descent, so I think his parents are born in India, and his actual name, his birth name is Kalpan Suresh Modi, I think is his full name. And when he was starting out in acting, he did this experiment with himself. And so, you know, when he was applying for acting jobs, he would send out his headshot, like you do as an actor. And on half of them, it said, you know, Kalpan Modi, his actual name. And on the other half of them, he listed his name as Kal Penn. That was his name. And who got more acting jobs, do you think? Kal Penn got more acting jobs, even though it's the same guy, right? He's exactly the same guy. So again, the discrimination held out. And again, that's a small experiment, right, that he ran. But it works in larger ones too, right? And so the question, of course, is what's going on, right? Clearly, we're seeing some discrimination. These are entirely made-up resumes. They are engineered to be either exactly the same or for the black-sounding names resumes to have better credentials and better experience. What's going on here, right? Is everyone a racist? And I will suggest to you that actually not quite, okay? So we do have in the United States negative stereotypes and prejudices that are circulating around black Americans. And we'll talk about that when we get to racism, but those stereotypes and prejudices go back a couple of hundred years, right? And they are still part of kind of the American collective consciousness, if you will. It's still part of socialization and social messaging. And so that's clearly having an effect. But again, are all these people racist? And I would suggest to you that probably not, right? Are there a few racists in there? I suspect there probably are, but probably not that many. So, and especially if you ask these people who were trying to hire people at these businesses, they would probably tell you, no, I'm not racist. I'm trying to do my job and be as objective as I possibly can. That's probably what they would tell you. But what's happening? Well, this is socialization in action, and this is kind of unintentional discrimination in action. Okay, so what's happening here is that when these HR managers are reviewing the resumes, when they see a name that is kind of stereotypically black sounding, or it sounds like the name of a black American, it automatically triggers those stereotypical ideas, right? It automatically brings them to mind, okay? And so those stereotypes and those prejudices, this is happening at an unconscious or a subconscious level, and it becomes like a set of lenses that these HR managers look through. And so they're looking through, let's say, a white person's resume, and they're like, okay, yeah, good, and then turns it over. And when they see a stereotypically black-sounding name, the filters come down, right? And suddenly they're seeing this person's credentials and experience through the lens of the stereotypes that they have learned and ingrained, right? Let me give you another example of this, because this sounds a little bit difficult to believe.
We're talking about stereotypes or racism?
We're talking about stereotypes about black Americans, and so this is racial discrimination. I suspect most of it is not intentional, but the numbers show that it is clearly a pattern, right? It is happening. But I would suggest that it's probably not intentional. Here's another example, and maybe this will make a little more sense. Okay, let's say here at Columbia College, we're going to set up a preschool. Okay, lots of our instructors have young kids. We're going to set up a preschool downstairs because we have space, and we're going to hire a preschool teacher to look after a bunch of kids during the day. Cool? Cool? Okay. You are all on the hiring committee. Okay? So we're going to hire a teacher to look after these small kids. Most of these kids are going to be 3 to 6 years old. Okay? Little kids. So I want you to kind of close your eyes for a second and we have a space downstairs. It's empty. We used to have a West Coast audio in there, but it's empty. So down there, that's where we're going to have our preschool. It's going to be down there, right below us almost. We're going to have, we're going to have toys and, mats and games, and it's going to be very colorful, and, there'll be all kinds of things to do, okay? So imagine it in your head if you can. And then we need to hire, like I said, a teacher to run this and to look after the kids. Now, probably who you're thinking of when you think of this person is a woman. Are you not? When you imagine who that teacher is, we're thinking of a woman. Probably a woman on the younger side a little bit, probably, right? Maybe 35 or between like 25 and 35, maybe a little bit older, but you're probably thinking of a young woman. You would probably imagine her to be like really nice, right? Like really caring and bubbly and lovely, right? That's kind of who we would want taking care of our kids, right? So, and that's that's who most people think of. And that's who most people think of when they think of an elementary school teacher as well, right? If I ask you to picture an elementary school teacher in your head, most of us will probably think of, a woman, right? Usually a young woman taking care of all these little kids. So when we're looking through resumes and to hire for this job, we're flipping through, okay, another woman, good, lots of good experience here. And then we come upon a man's resume in the pile, right? Now all of a sudden, we're seeing him through the lens of who we expect, right? We expect a young, bubbly, caring woman, right? And here is the resume of a man, right? And so automatically we have questions, right? What's the deal with this guy? Why does he want to take care of these young kids? This is supposed to be a woman's job. Is he gay? Is that a problem? We don't know. Suddenly we're asking ourselves all these questions trying to figure this guy out. And it's possible that there's absolutely nothing wrong with this guy and he's going to be fantastic. But our stereotypical image of this childcare worker is different than what he is, right? We have a certain idea of who it's supposed to be, and so all the people who fit into that category, we just look at their credentials, right? All of these women's resumes, we're like, yeah, okay, yeah, whatever, good, fine. And then the man's resume comes up and it's like, what's going on, right? And exactly, right? So and the same thing is happening here with these resumes, but on a more subconscious level, on a level that probably people are less aware of. And so, again, they're looking through all these white-sounding names and fine, okay, good, whatever. And then the lenses come down and suddenly they're seeing this applicant through the lens of what they know, quote unquote, what they know about Black Americans and Black people in America, right? And again, I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying that these people are even aware of what they're doing and what they're thinking, but it does happen. And it happens, I think, in many cases where the person that we think we should get, we don't get. You know what I mean? The person we think should fulfill a role isn't fulfilling it, right? I think this was probably where, not last election, but the election before, Hillary Clinton had some difficulty, right? Because Hillary Clinton, if you know, is a woman, right? But 4.5 or 5 years ago, she was applying for the job of President of the United States. And who is the President of the United States? Always. He's a man, right? Historically, he always has been. He's almost always been a white man, except for one instance. He's almost always been a white man. And even in movies, right? When you see movies with the US president, he's still a man. Are there any movies with a female president of the United States? Has that ever? So even in fiction, it's still a man. And so here's Hillary Clinton applying for the job of President of the United States. And it's difficult because she has to kind of overcome that stereotype, right? We're looking at her, or not we, but Americans were looking at her through their kind of prejudicial ideas about who the president should be, right? And so people were looking at her and they're like, oh, okay, well, is she strong enough? Is she tough enough to make tough decisions and tell people what to do and stand up to China and whatever else that Americans might want her to do? And with a male candidate, they probably wouldn't ask those questions, right? Because stereotypically, men will fall into that category of president better because part of that presidential identity is male, right? So Hillary has to make herself masculine enough so that people can take her seriously as president of the United States. But at the same time, Hillary is also a woman, so she can't just act like a man, right? People are going to be like, what's up with this? She's so unfeminine. What's going on, right? So she has to do both at the same time. She has to try to present herself as a woman, but also be masculine enough to be considered for this job that is stereotypically masculine, right? If she's too girly, if she's too feminine, people will think that she's not capable of being president, right? She's not strong enough or tough enough or logical enough or whatever. And again, I'm not saying any of that is correct, but people are when people sometimes defy our stereotypical ideas of who they should be, sometimes we get confused, right? And we start seeing things through the lens of what we think we know about people. And so here it's happening with resumes, right? If we were hiring for a childcare program downstairs, it would happen. If we got a male applicant, people would look at that applicant slightly differently, right? Maybe consciously, maybe they'd be like, hey, what's the deal with this dude? I don't know, but this is weird, right? People might actually say it, or it might be happening kind of under the surface and they might not realize it, but it happens, right? Sometimes our stereotypes are activated and then we start seeing people through the lens of that stereotype. Does that make sense? I feel like I've explained that better in the past, but let me give you a little bit more. So again, these resumes are being judged through kind of social messaging, right? Through the filter of stereotypes and prejudices against Black Americans in the United States. And the obvious question, I think, is like, well, what about the white names, right? What stereotypes do they trigger? And usually they do not. And this is not something to do with race. This is something to do with oppression in general. Usually the dominant group, and in this case white-sounding names, don't trigger any filters because white people belong to the dominant group. And the dominant group, whether you're talking about race or gender or sexuality or whatever you're talking about, the dominant group is seen as like the default, the normal, the neutral, the thing without, stereotype, right? That's how those things are seen. And so white people don't have those types of stereotypes associated with them, at least not in the way that affect their hiring, right? There are stereotypes about white people, right? They can't dance. What else? What other white people stereotypes are there? Can't dance. That's the big one. It's pretty true too, actually, for a lot of us.
So, I have an issue.
Yes.
If a white people has like a criminal history,
Oh.
will they still receive a callback if they apply for a job?
Well, most places don't like to hire people with criminal records, so I don't know. But I would say they would be looked upon more favorably than a Black person with a criminal record. I think that's fair to say.
What about like when
with no criminal record?
Yes.
Hard to know. I think that would probably be a point in favor of the black applicant, I think. As I say, most places don't like to hire people with criminal records. So FYI, if you're thinking about committing a crime, probably don't. What's that? Just don't get caught?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that, but you know, the cops are pretty good. You know, like they're,
There's no point.
what's that?
There's no point.
There's no point
Yeah.
in,
Crime.
there's no point in crime.
Yeah.
We'll get back to that a little bit later. Let me press pause. I don't want to lose my spot here. So dominant groups don't have any kind of strong stereotypical ideas associated with them because they're seen as the normal thing, right? And everything else is defined in relation to it, right? And so here in the US, being part of the dominant group, whites aren't really racialized, right? They're just kind of people. They're just seen as people. And then, because think about it, we have, in the US, there's black Americans, there's Asian Americans, there's Latinos or Latinx Americans. Are there white Americans? Caucasian Americans? Not usually, right? They're just Americans, right? White people get to be just Americans. Everyone else is defined by their difference from that, right? So the white people are the default. They're the normal, right? If you go to the store and you buy a razor, you can get Gillette or you can get Gillette for her or for women, right? Why? Because male stuff is the default. They're the dominant group. They're the normal ones, quote unquote, right? Women are something different, something other, right? So, yeah, so these resumes kind of get seen in a certain way that the white resumes just get seen for what they are, right? For their experience, for their qualifications, for their criminal record or lack thereof. But the black applicants are going to be seen through a different lens, right? Through a subconscious lens. I would like to ask you this question, and I will, but I think we should take a break because it's already 9 o'clock. Time is flying by. So take a break, come back, and we'll answer the question that has plagued people for centuries. Is Barack Obama black or white? Okay, I'll see you in 10. All right, and we're back. So the question I asked you, the eternal question I asked you before we went on break, is Barack Obama black or white? How would you answer that question if I asked you? He's black? Why do you say so? Because you have eyes and you're looking at him and okay. Is that the going answer, that this is a black man because you're looking at him and
He's the first black president.
right. So you're not only looking at him with your eyes, but you also know that he's kind of gone down in history as the first American president who's been black, right? So we kind of know that about him too. There's a little historical fact associated with Mr. Obama. Okay, so gentlemen, Cheyenne and Parsa, you've just kind of come into my class and you've come in late and you're being a little bit disruptive and it's a little bit frustrating. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, so Barack Obama is black, right? I think we can agree with that. He presents himself as a black man. He identifies himself as a black man, right? But strangely, the question is just a little more complicated than that. So a recent study was done where people were shown images of Barack Obama. And those images were kind of edited a little bit. They were filtered, they were Instagram filtered a little bit. And in some of the pictures, his skin was made to look just slightly darker, okay? And in some of the photos, his skin was made to look just slightly lighter, okay? So not so much that you would arouse suspicion, but just a little bit one way or the other, right? And they showed these pictures to university students who were taking part in the study. And they asked the university students, Scotty, what are you doing? I think you need to put that away because it's way too distracting for you. Thank you. So they asked the university students, which photo is the most accurate representation of Barack Obama? Which one is the best version? Which one is most representative of him? And so people would look and they would say, yeah, I think this is the best representation of Obama. And it was very interesting how this worked. So the students who were liberals, so the students who were Democrats, who were left-wing, who were in alignment with Barack Obama's party, the Democrats, the students whose political views were in alignment with Obama, they chose photos that showed him as having lighter skin. The conservative students, the students who were more Republican or more aligned with the Republican Party, they seemed to choose photos that showed him as darker skinned. And this kind of study even works for people that claim not to be racist, and it works for people who, even when you're using photos of people who are not famous, it still kind of works. People who had political views that were in alignment with Obama picked lighter colored pictures of him. People who disagreed with Obama or didn't like his policies, they chose the darker photos, which is weird, right? And so people are actually, based on their political values and the way they see America and how it should be, it actually changes the color of Barack Obama's skin. They're actually seeing him as a literally different color, which is bizarre, right? So the leader of this study here, Eugene Caruso, he says there's probably two things going on. There's two kind of biases or kind of stereotypical or prejudicial ideas under the surface, okay? And one of them, he says, is that in America, there are positive associations with lightness and whiteness, okay? So again, this is kind of a very general, how do we say it? Kind of a very general prejudice that is probably very deep under the surface that most people are not aware of. But there's a positive association with lightness. And so the people who like Obama, the people who agree with Barack Obama's policies, they're drawn toward images where he is shown as lighter. And the other thing that Eugene Caruso says is going on here is it's that Tajfel's social identity theory, if you remember that from the other day, that there's a tendency to view people of your group as or more favorably than people of the other group, right? So if you meet someone who cheers for the same sports team as you, you're more likely to see them as a cool person. And if you meet someone who cheers for another team, the opposing team, you're more likely to think of them in a negative light. And so, again, when these students who were more liberal, more Democrat, they look at Obama and they're like, yeah, that's one of us, right? He's our guy, we like him, we like his policies. They're more likely to look at him favorably. And that favorability is kind of expressed through lightness or whiteness, right? And the opposite was true for the more Republican students. So that's weird, right? That's weird that people actually see him, sorry, I'll get that in a sec. People actually see him differently depending on their political views and their political values. Bizarre. I would love to try that. Well, I think now that I know how it works, I probably couldn't take the test, but I would have liked to have taken it because I do generally like Obama and I like his policies. And so I'd be curious to know, like, if I took the test, would I have chosen a lighter colored version of him or not? That would be very interesting to know. Although, now that I know how the study works, I don't think I can do it. But I'm curious to know if I would test the same way as those students did. Okay, speaking of discrimination, though, do you remember any examples of discrimination from Mean Girls? So people were acting on their prejudicial ideas, either positively or negatively. Think for a minute. There's actually lots of discrimination going on. Not necessarily racial discrimination, but other ways in which people are acting based on stereotypes or prejudices.
Does it have to do within the movie or the things that the creators do?
Sorry, your question was within the movie or?
The things that the things that the creators do.
Things that, I'll take either one.
There was a part where they showed the Asian cool girls. They were speaking their language instead of English. It's like they're saying that they can't speak English.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So there was that group of, I think, Vietnamese girls, right? And they were always, yeah. Why was that? Like why were they speaking Vietnamese in every scene? Even though they're in an American school, why are they speaking Vietnamese all the time? And then at the end of the movie, when Gretchen joins the group, she's speaking Vietnamese to them as well, right? Why is that? Yeah, I think it's fair to say, yeah, it's probably their first language, but it is interesting that they're constantly speaking it throughout the movie, and they have no English lines, those girls, right, at all.
I think it's because, like, I don't think there's, like, a reason. I don't think, okay, wait. So, speaking your mother tongue language is always easier than speaking your secondary language.
Sure. Absolutely.
I see, like, them, I see some Vietnamese girls hanging with their own kind, so I think it's a lot easier for them to just communicate in their mother tongue.
100%. 100% it is, for sure.
Theirs could be also stereotype.
It might be. I almost feel in that high school they're the only ones that are kind of, those girls are the only characters that are identified as foreign, right? Everyone else seems to be, like, there are different sort of racial or ethnic groups, right? We've got Asians, we've got, black people, but I think they're all kind of assumed to be Americans, right? Asian Americans or black Americans, but it seems like those girls are the only ones that are really identified as maybe immigrants, right? Because they're speaking Vietnamese, when nobody else seems to be speaking any other language, right? Not even Spanish, which of course is very common in the United States. Other examples of discrimination.
And that's why they ask to each other, why are you speaking English? Because you're from Africa.
Oh,
Yeah, remember?
oh, right. So, okay, so there's the African thing, right? So there's two kind of African things that come up, right? Where Katie sits down with the mean girls and she says I'm from Africa, and one of the girls, Karen, she's like, so why are you white? And so yeah, the stereotype, of course, is that everyone from Africa is a black person, right? Think about joining groups or not joining groups for discrimination. What groups does Katie get asked to join? Yeah, she gets asked to join the mathletes. Why did they ask her to join the mathletes? Right, she's good at math, right? We know she's good at math. She likes math, but there's another reason too.
Punishment.
No, not the punishment part yet. That's later. What?
Extra points?
Extra points?
Diversity hire.
She's a diversity hire, right? So, is it Kevin Napur or is it Ms. Nobury who says yeah? Oh no, it's Kevin. It's Kevin G, right? Because he says he's like, hey, hey Africa, you should join the mathletes. We're cool, and he's like, and plus we get more money if there's a girl in the team, and we want jackets this year, right?
No, I think they said that they think they can do with an extra member and there will be ideal.
Well, they definitely need an extra member, but they ask her specifically because she's a girl, right? Because they want more points or more funding so they can get their jackets. So they positively discriminate towards Katie because of her gender, right? Yeah, she's good at math and she needs to be, but they just positively discriminate because she's a girl, right? What about when Katie gets asked to join the plastics? Why do the plastics kind of take her in? She's hot, she's pretty, right? And so they positively discriminate towards her based on her physical appearance, right? They think she's cute, they think she'll kind of look good. She's on brand for them, so to speak. And so they ask her to join, right? What else? Other examples of discrimination. What about Kevin Napur? Kevin G.
There's nothing that I see. There's something about him that discriminates in the movie.
There is one line where he pretty clearly lays out his discrimination. What does he say? Do you remember?
Is it like he only dates a woman of color?
Exactly, right? So there's this idea that maybe he has a crush on Katie, right? And Gretchen's trying to say, oh my gosh, he's so into you, and Gretchen's trying to get this going, and Kevin's like, hey, sorry, I only date women of color, right? So he's discriminating, right? He does not date white girls, right? And again, whether that's okay or not is another thing, but he's discriminating, right? That's a discriminatory thing. What else is there? Evidence of discrimination. Those are all good so far. We've got the mathletes, we've got Kevin Napur, we've got the plastics and Katie. Let me see what I had. I have a little list. Oh, okay. So Katie, good. Oh, right. Remember when Regina was telling the story of Janice, and Regina did not invite Janice to the pool party because she either started the rumor or started to believe that she was a lesbian, right? And so Yeah, Janice got discriminated against. She wasn't invited because of her perceived sexuality. I don't even think that that is her sexuality, but that's what it was perceived to be, and she got discriminated against, right? What about the store? Remember when Regina goes to try on the dress and she's been eating all those bars so she doesn't fit into it anymore? That store is called 1, 3, and 5, right? And so those of you women who know your dress sizes, what sizes are 1, 3, and 5?
I couldn't tell you.
You couldn't tell me? They're pretty small. You've got to be on the small side to fit into a 1 or a 3 or a 5. I think the average woman is about a size 6, give or take. And so you kind of have to be on the tiny side to get into a 5 or a 3 or, God forbid, a 1, right? So that store discriminates as well, right? They only sell clothes for very slim women, right? And then when Regina can't fit into that dress, the woman says, oh, maybe you could go to Sears. And she's horrified, right? But yeah, that's discrimination there. And then Kevin Napur, right? I only date women of color, right? Discrimination. Now, we have another thing to talk about, the kind of the last thing in oppression that we need to talk about, and it's privilege. And if I asked you, and I am asking you, what privilege is, what would you tell me?
The property that you own. Wait, no.
I think you might be thinking of something else.
Yeah.
What's privilege, or even a privilege?
Is it the benefits?
Okay, so it's benefits, right? How else would you give me a little bit more than that?
I think I would say advantages you have that other people don't.
Okay, advantages you have that other people don't, right? Has anyone ever used that word like in context? Like, do your parents ever talk about privileges or a privilege that you have that might be taken away if you don't do what you're supposed to, if you don't get your grades up or behave or whatever it is? That's often how it's used, right? We often use it in terms of, this is a privilege, and if you don't behave or don't respect the privilege, it will be taken away, right? It will be revoked. And in a way, that's kind of connected to how we'll be talking about it. But for our purposes, let me see, no, I don't have a definition. Privilege is a tricky one to define. And it's, if you look at it, how it's used in media and social media, sometimes people know what they're talking about, and sometimes people are a little bit off. But it's a difficult thing to kind of think about and imagine. But for tomorrow, I have a little bit of an article for us to read about what privilege is like and how it works and how to think about it. And then we'll kind of pull it apart and try to understand that idea. It's not an easy idea to understand, and I'll admit the article that we're going to read is not my favorite, just because I don't like the analogy and the way that she's kind of explained it. But it's an article that is very widely read when it comes to privilege, and so we'll read it too and kind of try to understand what we need to understand from it. And so it can be a little bit of a tricky thing, but we will work it out. So that's what we'll do tomorrow. We'll read that and we'll talk about privilege, and then we'll move on and we'll start talking about our first form of oppression, which is ableism or disableism, depending on how you want to say it. But until then, I think I will let you go, and I'll see you tomorrow, and and I hope you have a good rest of the day.
Not like 5 minutes early.
What's that?
Not like 5. Is it just like 5 minutes early?
It is, but I'm allowed to do that sometimes.
Okay.
Yes,
I thought you weren't allowed.
because I am allowed to do that. At least I hope so. Okay, see you tomorrow, everyone. Bye. You're welcome, Abby. Thank you.